Hey yo, what a div, y'all. Let's get right into it. I gotta give a shout out to Spellslinger in this video because I mean it just got its massive nerf reverted. How can we not celebrate that, right? I know that this is a channel that talks a lot about Sanctum, but remember, I do talk about other builds and whatnot. And I think Spellslinger has some meaningful impact on our ability to level and prepare Sanctum runners as well. So it's definitely worthwhile for talking about that. But just because, like, realistically, the last time that this like archetype of build was even really like quote unquote playable in the game under most people's eyes, right? I've played it since then, but like under most people's eyes, this hasn't really been playable since Heist League. In Heist League, they 3.12 they nerfed Spellslinger by taking it from 20% base mana reservation cost at all levels to that 30 to 25 scaling that you've probably known if you've ever looked at it since since then. And with this patch reverting that, it's huge. Spellslinger is finally back on the menu as one of the best ways to level for casters. Not necessarily the best. We've gotten a lot better at leveling. We've gotten a lot better tools since then, but it's just really comfy, and that was always the strength of it back then. It was comfy then. It's going to be comfy now. And so I want to take this video to reintroduce it to the spotlight, especially to people who have not played in an era where Spellslinger was actually relevant, just so you can see some things that people were doing with it, how it's used, where its limitations tend to be at, and what you would need to prepare for if you want to push it beyond those limitations, right? All that said, let's get into it. Alrighty, so for those of you who are new, right, what is Spellslinger? Spellslinger is the ability to trigger socketed spells, like it links to spell gems, and then you trigger them when you attack with a wand, specifically with a wand, right? So equip your wand like a caster would be, but then you use like Frenzy or Power Siphon or something, and it triggers spells. And what I feel like GG probably initially intended this to be like a utility option for getting like curses and whatnot triggered for wanders, and it absolutely has use cases for that. And this buff will definitely help it get back towards that role. But what people actually took to it for, because it has the damage stats on it as well and the cooldown scaling and whatnot, people instead looked at this gem and said, ooh, we can make full builds out of it because it triggers spells. It's another way to trigger your spark, your arc, your firestorm, whatever it may be. So in that vein, they did the nerf back then, but we're getting that reverted. Now, a lot of things have changed since that time period. And this is not relevant for, if you were Googling Spellslinger or YouTubing for Spellslinger and you found some old videos, there's some things that have changed from back then. Or, if you're just an older player who hasn't really thought about all this, they lock in with me real quick so we can talk about the things that have changed. So number one, the most important change, honestly, I felt this one the most when I played my Triggerbot Sabo, like Spellslinger Triggerbot Sabo in Crucible. The nerf I felt the most by far is the Expedition League nerf that made triggers costs mana. As you see, back in the day, we didn't have to pay mana for our triggered skills. This concept is such a foreign idea to me, but it absolutely matters here because spells are expensive. And so we want to keep that in mind. Also, since Spellslinger was relevant, auras got a lot stronger, both in terms of base and in their investment options, right? But we also got much better access to reservation efficiency, the new stat, which back in the day used to be called reduced mana reservation, right? So some buffs, some nerfs. It's just important to observe, to be aware of both, right? Then we also had support gems get nerfed in 3.15 as well. That was a big thing. When you're playing for something that's converting percent mana into more supports, the loss of power in your supports and the increase in power from other reservations was definitely very notable. This also should include things like Heralds getting stronger, or like Tempest Shield is a lot better than it used to be, right? Arctic Armor, stuff like that got a lot better since the time that Spellslinger was actually relevant. And then just generally speaking, because so many buttons are getting gooder and gooder and gooder, right? Like gooder, really? Good job, me. Come on, we speak better English than that. Anyways, it's automation support, right? For things, or, we're in a situation nowadays where like cast when damage taken is a difficult button to fit into some builds. And that's an insane statement because back in the day, cast when damage taken was just a default assumption in your character. And you should still try to fit it in, obviously, but it's just a statement on how much more competitive our gem sockets have become. And so, this is a way to help like fight that if you don't need much for reservations, right? It's just all things that have changed. It's not necessarily positive or negative, just things that are different about the game since the last time Slinger was relevant. All of that being said, though, it does not change the strength of this archetype, right? The biggest strength that Spellslinger had back then and definitely will have now is its performance in the earlier stages of the game. It's no secret that cast speed, especially, is one of the biggest pain points for casters. It just takes way too long to get most spells to feel actually good in this game's ecosystem because we don't have cast speed in the way that, you know, you get like a early 1.6 attack speed bow and you're cruising, right? And all the attack speeds from there, like you have to deal with the base cast time of spells, which a lot of spells have 0.7 or higher base cast times, including some of you I'm thinking about with 0.8, like the fizz spells, the fizz dot spells rather, or 1.0. RIP to Hex Blast still has that atrocious cast time even with a cooldown, right? So the strength of this is really getting around that cast time, and the time which the cast time feels the worst is in the campaign. So you still get the, you know, you still get that incredible feel. Also, you get to cheat damage in a couple ways. Pretty sure you've noticed if you think about like Armor Prima leveling and things like that, oftentimes you can cheese a lot of damage as a caster by just being able to use more than one skill. Or think about how like dot builds traditionally use 2 to 3 dot skills in order to do more damage. Same thing with Spellslinger. We can do that here as well. You also get to convert a couple more weapons into usable weapons because you do get the attack damage from your weapon applied to the skill through Spellslinger. So that's also an option in play, right? And you get stuff like other utilities. Mark on hit becomes an option because you're actually using an attack if you can get your accuracy high enough for that. Same thing for getting frenzy charges or power charges through Power Siphon or Frenzy, right? There's some options that really do open themselves up when you are playing in this archetype. Now, after the campaign, you get into like early mapping, and usually, I'm just gonna be real with you, if you cruised through the campaign, you were chill till yellows, always. And Spellslinger's no exception. Now, where we ran into this wall usually was about like red maps. But you could go a little bit beyond that. Like I did it in Crucible and got to two stones on the Triggerbot Sabo. It was painful, but I did get it done because I wanted to see just how bad it would actually be. It was not actually one of my worst experiences. I was more miserable because I was mad that my idea didn't work that well. It was not a very well thought out idea. I was just trying to see something, right? Now, once you get beyond 2 stones, I think you're on your own and you should consider swapping off of the archetype outside of a couple specific skills. I do think, especially with the with the reversion and the fact that there are 2-button skills that just might be better this way, where you have better, like, what do you call it? You lose out on theoretical damage, right? But you have better actual damage because of the playstyle difference of pressing 1 button versus 2 or 3, that some of these archetypes might actually still perform very well through Slinger, such as DDVD or BFBB, right? So that's what I'm thinking. In short, very, very breezy campaign experience. And it gets harder and harder to scale up, which some tips for scaling up is, again, remember that the flat damage on your weapon does actually matter. It is about as effective as just getting flat spells on your weapon. If I remember correctly, actually, it's better. Did not fact check this before setting up this because it was a thought that I had literally as I was pressing your card. But I believe it actually is better to have like flat attack damage on the wand, right? And with the crafting weighting changes, you can put flat on through the essence, right? Anger, wrath, or hatred, and then hope to roll the spell modifiers that you desire as well, which you can actually get the double flat on there. This is actually a really cool thing you can do, as well as another way to accompany, make up for not having +1 level, for example, right? So you've got your options there. Real quick reminder, subscribe to the channel. You know, you get to find out when I post new stuff, including, especially, I will be playing Spellslinger at some point this week. So if you're curious about how I intend to employ this, it's a good way to find out. I'm just saying. Anyways, back to the video. Thank you for watching. Now, the rest of this video, I just dedicated to giving you guys some skill ideas, right? This is not even close to an exhaustive list of ways to use Spellslinger. I'm just putting it in your mind, right? In case, again, you've never really played this way, or you've grown tired of Googling Spellslinger trying to find things. Here's some ideas, right? 1, in the lightning, we're going to go like by damage type, by the way. There are technically cross damage type setups as well, but I'm going to start by going by damage type because I think that's just the easiest way to think about most setups. Scaling things together usually makes it better. So starting at lightning damage, my personal favorite out of the things I've thought of so far is arc and then one of ball lightning or lightning conduit. Uncertain which one. There's a world where it's actually all three, and maybe even leveling, it might actually be better to be all three and just have very little supports on them, because the extra skill sometimes a lot of the time ends up being stronger than +1 support on 1 to 2 of them. That's like a thing to consider, but not entirely sure, right? I have to do some testing when I actually can test it, because I can't test this yet because we don't have the buffs in, which that's kind of my also note here, right? These are things that have worked previously or things that I have tested and mused about before. And they were mused about in an environment where I'm kind of simulating what that what the buff is going to feel like relative to everything else that I have experienced recently with Spellslinger, as opposed to having literally been in the game to test it. So, grain of salt, prepare, all that good stuff, right? Other lightning skills to consider would be Stormbrand and Cracking Lance of Disintegration, specifically only the transfig for Cracking Lance, by the way, because regular Cracking Lance cannot build up intensity while being triggered, and therefore is a substantially worse skill. And Stormbrand doesn't sound like a skill you would think of using with it, because you think like, well, when it wants cast speed and stuff, right? There was a very really funny run from actually after the nerfs to Spellslinger, funnily enough, where Jung did a Guardian Rush on Spellslinger, Stormbrand, Inquisitor, and it was like single skill Stormbrand. The entire idea was literally just using Spellslinger to make the gameplay faster and also allow him to generate frenzies to juice up the Stormbrand that way as another source of cast speed that you usually don't get access to. Not saying that's optimal, right? But I'm saying like it's an option. You could then therefore combine it with things like it could be Arc, Stormbrand, Lightning Conduit, right? That's like an option. Could be Arc, Wave of Conviction, Lightning Conduit. Play around in there a little bit. That's kind of the appeal of this archetype. We're gonna go a little bit faster now because the explanation there kind of applies to a lot of what I'm going to say going forward, right? This is ideas. Play around with them. See what other things you like. So, in cold skills, my favorite setup is just a belligerent spray the screen setup. Freezing Pulse, Creeping Frost, Ice Spear, which, by the way, surprisingly decent amount of damage through the projectile scaling here, because Creeping Frost and Ice Spear both are shotgunning skills, just in slightly different ways, right? Ice Spear, or rather, shotgunning is a bad use of the term because it's one of them shotguns and one of them is a barrage, but you get the idea, right? They both scale well. They scale well with projectiles. You can do a volleyed Creeping Frost and then just Ice Spear as Ice Spear for your single target, and then Freezing Pulse helps cover the clear, right? Really cool. Also, it makes use of Flame Wall. Decide on your own if you actually like using the reservation on Flame Wall. It's an option, right? Cold Dot Slinger is also an option, really popular one from back then, just because it takes the 2 to 3 button build that dot builds usually were and makes them 1 button, at least for early stages in the game. One of the biggest problems that this archetype has is literally its damage scaling options, because it does not benefit from the flat damage, right? You can't, since they're dots, you don't get anything from transferring flat damage from your weapon to the gem. And so instead, Spellslinger is just nerfing the individual skill buttons damages in exchange for making them more comfortable to use, as well as then taking up reservation spots. This also applies to a couple other builds down the list. You're gonna hear that sentiment is going to carry forward, right? So they ceiling a lot harder than other things, but it's a way to get those builds to the point where you would then be comfortable self-casting. That's kind of the idea. Looking at fire skills. I actually have a lot of fire skills that could be played here. I did this in Crucible League on Saboteur as a ball slinger. It's what I actually have it named as in my POB, by the way. Blazing Salvo plus Rolling Magma is what I did, and like shooting them through Flame Wall, and that was kind of the idea. It was a really goofy build. It did enough damage. It was kind of weird. I probably could have done it so much better with the knowledge I have now, but whatever, right? I just kind of threw it to that because I thought it'd be funny. Armageddon Brand and Firestorm. I saw somebody do this, and it made, because I've been trying to think of a way to do it with Firestorm for a while, and the use of Armageddon Brand and Firestorm together is perfect. I actually really like it, especially if you look into Armageddon Brand of Volatility and Firestorm of Meteors particularly. You use it to just sling out these big nukes that I think actually could be really cool and really fun to play around with. Let me know if you do try this one, because I'm actually really, really curious about this. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Old King, right? This was the best slinger build back in the day. DD, right? DD and VD are skills that have a storied history. Even if you are a newer player, you've already heard about how strong DD is or can be. This is another way to play it, especially back then we did not have DD of Chain Reaction. which would have definitely done a lot more for the ability to scale this build as a full-on regular build. Like, you still scaled it very well through the like flat and regular spell scaling, but you lean a lot on the corpse scaling. And I think DD of Chain Reaction is a really nice injection into that archetype. So keep that in mind. Also, we didn't have VD of Seething either back then. So seriously, keep your eye on this archetype. Genuinely, it might actually be good again. And the last one for fire, because I said I had a lot for fire, is actually Flame Wall. There was a Flame Wall Trickster or Elementalist back then, but it was usually a Trickster, where the whole build was literally just using Kinetic Blast to, like KB, the good skill, to just spread Flame Wall everywhere and use Flame Wall as your clearing skill. And then you had like a fire trap or something to supplement your single target, but you to help out with single target, but you were just like flame walling for clear. It was absolutely one of the fastest mappers I've ever seen. It was such a cool build. It had a ridiculously terrible damage ceiling, but it was so cool. So if it's good again, like, or if you just want to mess around, like, it's an idea, right? It's out there. Think about it. You know what I'm saying? I'm just here to give you ideas. You can do with these ideas as you feel. You could be like, this guy has shit ideas. Get this shit away from me. Hey, like, man, I'm just here to like tell you about the cool things I've seen, right? Speaking of, let's get into Fizz, right? If you were not around for BFBB during any of its time that it was around, this is another way to relive that skill combo. Just because, you know, you do actually get to trigger skill like BF, like Bladefall, and then have it, you know, trigger BB as well, and it makes the playstyle a one button playstyle instead of two. Was very comfortable for leveling and whatnot. You could also do BV and BB of unloading. That's also an option, right? I don't think it's necessarily better or worse. It's just an option, right? I would say it's probably worse thinking about the damage projection personally, but also because BB of unloading already has the really good setup with the automation recall on Saboteur, right? So like I feel like you're just competing for no reason in that space. But hey, look, do what you do, right? Also, there's Fizz.Slinger, which this has a very interesting interaction that to explain, because a lot of things when they make you reserve, if a skill costs life and you try to make it reserve mana, it will reserve your life. And this is actually not the case in this case in particular, right? Like specifically talking about these skills, because Spellslinger says it is an override and not a conversion, right? Not like how mines convert the cost into reservation. Slinger is an override, and therefore straight up turns it into a mana reservation. So you get to reserve mana for Xang and Reap, but they still spend life on cast. So, you know, be wary of that. And you get to include CF in the setup as well, because it doesn't actually need to be on Slinger because it's just a buff skill that also gets applied by you slinging. This was actually a really popular setup for like leveling and playing Fizz dot builds. Like back when Fizz dot initially came out, a lot of people originally leveled it as a Slinger because the cast times on Xang and Reap are unwieldy. Just saying. Now, similarly, we go into Chaos skills. The first thing on this list is, of course, Chaos.Slinger. I think this was the most popular of the non-VDDD options back then, and it was literally just because we got to use Cat Rend again. Genuinely, that's like most people's reason for loving this. It felt comfy. It was smooth. You got to combine Soul Rend and ED Contagion. You still got to run Bane because you had to run it as a self-casting anyways to actually apply all the curses, because otherwise Bane literally would not trigger the curses because you cannot trigger triggers. That's like a thing that's like in there, which is it's a little weird when you think about it from the first, because basically Spellslinger can count as trying to trigger the spell like Bane and the linked curses, and so the linked curses all just freak out and disable. It's different than how you can use like Blast Rain to cast. You can do like Mana Forged arrows to cast on crit, because the thing that's being casted on crit there does not register Mana Forged arrows as a viable trigger, in case you were curious how that interaction like actually works. But so you could just go crazy with the Chaos Dot here, right? Huge fan of this one. It's super comfy. It has the same damage scaling problems that Fizz.Slinger and Cold.Slinger have, though, right? It's a comfort thing. You need to you know, convert out of it at some point if you actually plan on pushing further. And the last one on my list of skills to suggest, right, just on the list of things that I just remember being really huge fans of when they came around, Dark Pact. If you ever were to ask me what my like top 3 shitty skills that I'm always trying to find a way to play in the game, number 1 is always Stormcall. Number 2 has been Icicle Mines in recent years. And number 3 is always Dark Pact. I love this skill. And this was the last time I played it. It was a Spellslinger character. You would spell sling the summon skeletons, so that way you're not DPing off yourself and sacrificing your own life, but you're scaling off of how ridiculously easy it is to get minion life up. And that was the build, and it worked. It was really comfy. It actually has real scaling options that you can play around with. I would heavily look into it if you're interested, right? And that's it. Now, to wind this video down, I just want you to know, again, this is not even close to an exhaustive list. I haven't talked about like weird uses of it involving single skill automation stuff, or like there's an old setup for DD characters that used it to do desecrate, because you could apply other effects alongside the desecrate for just casting DD afterwards. Like there are a lot of things that people were willing to sacrifice a little bit of their like mana reservation space for, in terms of either making builds stronger or feel more comfortable, that Spellslinger really opened up. And I'm so glad that it's finally had that horrendous nerf reverted. Even in the current state where things now are a little bit harder to trigger and sustain and whatnot, I still think it's going to be really cool to see what people do now that the some of the shackles, some of the chains have been released. I'm super excited to see. And I just had to talk about this because, again, it does kind of impact like what you'll be seeing for me from leveling setups for the various Sanctum runners that I'm going to be posting about going forward. Right now, that said, if you want to see those things, you should subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed, so you can get notifications when I post those. We'll be talking about stuff on stream. I will not be streaming that much during this week in particular, mostly because of work or literally just preparing for videos, as I do put more of my effort and time and energy towards the YouTube channel than I ever really will like into the streaming part, at least for now, right? So I won't be streaming as much this week. So if you want to reach me like more in a more live fashion, the Discord is going to be better, or you can leave comments. I do see comments that people leave on the videos. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. Have a great one. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.